One of the interesting little sidelights that you cast on this preparation for war was the fact that he was not above pawning religious treasures in order to raise funds. And that, from a king who is outwardly exceedingly pious, was quite a shock.
It was. Realising that and thinking through the implications of that was one of the nice epiphany moments in the book. Now, there was a precedent for pawning religious treasure, I beg your pardon, royal treasure. Edward III had pawned the crowns of England. He'd pawned a number of religious items. Edward III wasn't particularly religious. He was averagely religious. Henry V, who clearly modelled this expedition on the Cressy expedition of 1346, led by Edward III, he sees this as a religious expedition first and foremost. He is going to prove to people that God favours him in battle. So therefore the preparations have to be meticulous. But the expense required him to look for all possible resources. Because Henry V really thought of the 1415 campaign as a demonstration of religious favouritism, he is able to draw on religious resources to support him. He believed he was doing God's work.
This book is not just about the Battle of Agincourt, but you wouldn't have chosen 1415 but for the Battle of Agincourt, I imagine. And I wanted to ask you how you approached writing about it, given it's been written about by so many people for so many centuries before. What did you hope that you could bring to it by writing about it?
Well, largely to divorce our idea of what is unfolding in the chapter on October 1415 from all of the hagiography, the propaganda that's been written since. I mean, don't get me wrong, there are many very good books on Agincourt, and Agincourt, A New History by Anne Curry is a superb book. I'd like to sort of flag that one up in particular. But having said that, these are all written with a preconceived idea of what Henry V was, what he means to people. And I wanted to get away from that sort of post-Agincourt, post-victorious idea of king, the supremely confident man, and especially away from the Shakespearean idea of a charming sort of uber king, and get back to the nitty-gritty of an extremely scared man who basically was exceptionally brave. He had so many failings, I do not like the man at all, but the one thing I cannot take anything away from is his utterly remarkable courage. He put everything on the line. He staked his kingdom, his dynasty, his life, everything to prove himself in this religious sense in battle in France. And he stayed the course. His courage was never really found wanting, despite having to make some extremely dangerous decisions in France once he was on foreign territory. So I wanted to get that across, the unfolding man. But at the same time, I mean, as you say, many other things are happening. You have the Council of Constance happening on the other side of Europe, which, although it was a long, long way away, was of very great interest to Henry, because as a pious man, he wanted to know not only was God going to see the Christendom reunited under one pope, but also who was going to be that pope, how he was going to relate to the other nations within Christendom after that pope had been elected. There are lots of very important questions in his mind. How he's going to get on with the Holy Roman Emperor, Sigismund, for another example. How that council was going to judge his burning people alive for heresy, Lollardy. So all sorts of questions. Now, if you treat these two subjects separately, Agincourt and Constance, and if you divorce all these subjects, you may well end up with a good book about Agincourt or a good book on Constance. But from Henry V's point of view, it's the integration of these that really matters. And the timing, of course, is all important, because these don't all have a separate narrative. They're all part of one narrative. So as Agincourt is coming nearer, so the resolution at Constance is coming nearer. So the treachery of a certain Duke of Burgundy is becoming clear. So are the multiple diplomatic arrangements that Henry has in place with almost every country in Europe. And of course these waver, and they are subject not just to what's Henry's planning to do in France, they're subject to what's going on in Constance and everywhere else throughout Europe too. So you have to bear in mind lots and lots of multiple narratives, all compressed into this one. Yes, Agincourt is not just one story.
But the defining moment of his life, and the defining moment, perhaps, for his posthumous legend, is the decision to attack, not to wait for the French to attack, but to go on the offensive.
Yes, I mean, that was the final remarkable decision of a series of them. And his plan for Harfleur, the siege of Harfleur, although the siege of Harfleur was successful, it wasn't a good plan because he ended up destroying so much of the town. He severely imperiled the place. It made it very difficult for him to hold it, so he had to leave 1,200 men to look after Harfleur. He then marched in the style of Edward III, in the footsteps of Edward III, towards the crossing on the Somme, which is known as Blanchetaque. Unfortunately, the French had read their history books too, and they got there first, and they managed to put such a force there that Henry was persuaded he could not cross at that point. Edward III had fought his way across. Henry V decided he couldn't. Now, which is very interesting. But Henry then decides he's not going to turn back. He's not going to turn towards the coast. He's going to go inland into the really dangerous territory where he's totally cut off. And he's still on the south side of the Somme. The idea to march in the first place was an extraordinarily brave decision. The idea to march inland after his army was beginning to run out of food, that was an even braver decision in the circumstances. And then he got across the river, and the decision on the 25th of October to go straight for the enemy and not wait to be attacked, as every army had, Archer-based army had from England in the past 70 years. He decided to take the fight to the French. He took them totally by surprise on the field of battle and won a remarkable victory. There was a series of decisions there, and that last one takes the biscuit.